Have you ever noticed how the most powerful people in any room rarely raise their voice? They don't demand attention. They don't explain themselves endlessly. They simply exist with a quiet certainty that draws everyone toward them. And suddenly, the entire energy shifts. The conversation orbits around their silence. Now imagine if you understood the invisible architecture behind that power. That's where the real game begins. You've been taught that nice guys finish last, that the world rewards ruthlessness and punishes kindness. But I'll tell you something that perhaps no one has told you. This binary thinking is exactly what keeps you trapped. Niccolò Machiavelli, the man history painted as the prophet of manipulation, understood something far more nuanced than simple cruelty. He understood the psychological machinery beneath human behavior, the hidden levers that move empires and break kingdoms. And today, you're going to learn how to see that machinery for yourself. But before we dive into these 8 ruthless lessons, drop this affirmation in the comments. I choose strategic wisdom over reactive emotion. Because what you're about to discover isn't about becoming cold or calculating. It's about becoming free. Free from the unconscious patterns that make you predictable. Free from the emotional reactivity that gives others control over your psychic energy. Free from the persona you've built to please a world that will never be satisfied. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Machiavelli's genius wasn't in teaching cruelty. It was in making the unconscious mechanisms of power visible. And visibility, my friend, is the first step towards sovereignty. Lesson 1. Here's what you don't realize about transparency. Every time you explain yourself completely, you're not building trust. You're surrendering territory. You're handing someone the map to your inner kingdom and wondering why they keep showing up at your borders uninvited. Machiavelli wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." This isn't about deception. This is about understanding that your psychic energy, that invisible force Jung called libido, is finite. And every complete explanation, every detailed justification, every exhaustive defense drains that energy into someone else's reservoir. Think about the last time someone asked you a simple question, "What are you doing this weekend?" Most people respond with their entire itinerary, as if confession were a form of connection. But what they're actually doing is creating predictability. And predictable people? They're furniture in other people's stories. Now here's the paradox that makes this lesson ruthless. Mystery isn't about what you hide. It's about what you make others curious enough to discover. When you answer, "I'm taking care of something important," and let the silence hang there like smoke, you've just activated the other person's projection mechanism. Their imagination fills the gaps. And their imagination, that works for you now. Do you know why? Because projection, as Jung taught us, reveals more about the projector than the projected. When people don't know your full story, they project their own fears, desires, and assumptions onto you. And suddenly, you're not just yourself, you're a screen for their unconscious material. This is how influence operates beneath the surface of language. But here's what most people miss. Calculated opacity isn't about being mysterious for mystery's sake. It's about protecting your psychological sovereignty. When you don't explain everything, you maintain what Jung called psychic energy conservation. You're not spending your life force trying to control how others perceive you. You're simply being and letting them deal with their discomfort. The truly powerful understand this instinctively. They reveal just enough to maintain connection, but never enough to lose leverage. Your information is your currency. Your story is your power. Don't auction it off to anyone who asks a casual question. Lesson 2. You already know you're not the same person with your grandmother as you are with your closest friend. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself, which one is the real you? Here's the uncomfortable truth. There is no real you in the way you've been taught to think about identity. What you call your authentic self is actually a constellation of possible selves, and the art of power lies in knowing which self to activate in which situation. Machiavelli understood this centuries before Jung formalized it. A prince ought to take care that he never lets anything slip from his lips that is not replete with the 5 qualities, that he may appear to him who sees and hears him altogether merciful, faithful, humane, upright, and religious. This sounds manipulative until you understand what Jung called the persona, the mask we wear to interface with the world. You already have multiple personas. You switch between them unconsciously every day. The ruthless lesson is making this unconscious process conscious and strategic. Are you talking to someone analytical? Activate your logical, data-driven self. Someone emotional? Access your empathetic, feeling-oriented self. Someone hierarchical? Present your authority-respecting self. This isn't fake. These are all genuine aspects of who you are. The question is, are you choosing which aspect to emphasize, or are you letting chance decide? Think of water. It becomes ice in the cold, steam in the heat, and liquid at room temperature. But it's always H2O. Its essence never changes. Only its expression adapts to context. You are the same. Your core values, your integrity, your fundamental principles, these are your H2O. But your expression, that should flow like water into whatever container serves your purpose. But here's the shadow side of this lesson, and you need to hear it. If you adapt so completely that you lose touch with your core, you'll experience what Jung called inflation, a dissolution of the ego where you become everyone and no one simultaneously. This is the danger zone. This is where the persona devours the person. The antidote? Regular check-ins with yourself. Ask, in adapting to this situation, am I strengthening or abandoning my core values? If you're strengthening them by making them more effective, you're mastering the protean self. If you're abandoning them to be liked, you're just people-pleasing with sophisticated vocabulary. How long will you continue believing you must be the same person in every situation? How long will you sacrifice effectiveness on the altar of a fixed identity that never existed in the first place? Lesson 3. Let me tell you something that will make you deeply uncomfortable. Everything you're desperately trying to hold on to is holding you hostage. Machiavelli wrote, "Since love and fear can hardly exist together, if we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved." But the deeper psychological truth beneath this ruthless observation is this. The moment you become dependent on being loved, you've handed someone else the remote control to your nervous system. Detachment isn't cold, it's freedom. And I mean real freedom. Not the libertarian fantasy of doing whatever you want, but the psychological freedom Jung called individuation. The process of becoming whole by reclaiming the psychic energy you've invested in outcomes you can't control. Think about the last negotiation you were in. For a salary, a relationship boundary, anything. If you walked in needing the outcome, you already lost. Because need creates desperation, and desperation creates transparency, and transparency creates vulnerability. The person across from you could smell your attachment like wolves smell fear. But if you walked in genuinely prepared to walk away, suddenly you have something they can't take from you, your indifference to their approval. And that indifference, not to them as humans, but to the outcome, creates what Freud called psychic distance, the space necessary for clear perception. Here's the cruel paradox Machiavelli understood. The less you need something, the more likely you are to get it. Not because the universe rewards detachment. It doesn't care. but because detachment removes the invisible desperation signals you've been broadcasting without realizing it. Now stop and think for a moment. What are you afraid to lose right now? A job, a relationship, someone's approval? That fear, that specific terror of loss, is where your power is leaking. Every day, every interaction. But detachment doesn't mean not caring. Listen carefully. It means caring without being controlled by that care. It means loving people without needing them to love you back in specific ways. It means wanting outcomes without your self-worth depending on achieving them. The Stoics called this amor fati, love of fate. Jung called it acceptance of the shadow. Machiavelli just called it being dangerous. Because the most dangerous person in any room isn't the one with nothing to lose. It's the one who has everything to lose and remains unmoved. Practice this gradually. Start small. Don't be so attached to winning trivial arguments. Don't be so invested in being understood by people who aren't trying to understand. Don't be so desperate to avoid discomfort that you sacrifice your boundaries. And watch what happens. Watch how people start treating you differently when they sense you can't be easily manipulated. Watch how opportunities appear when you stop chasing them with visible desperation. Watch how respect emerges when you stop performing for approval. Lesson 4. Most people think power announces itself, that it arrives with fanfare, demands attention, makes its presence known. This is exactly backwards. Real power whispers, or more accurately, real power is often silent. It operates in the gaps between words, in the pauses between breaths, in the absence that makes others uncomfortable enough to fill the void themselves. Machiavelli observed, "Never was anything great achieved without danger." But the deeper lesson is about what kind of danger, not the loud danger of conflict and confrontation. That's amateur hour. The real danger is in mastering what I call strategic absence, the art of not being there when others expect you and being present when they don't. Here's what happens in most conversations. Someone asks a difficult question, and you immediately scramble to fill the silence with an answer. You're so uncomfortable with the pregnant pause that you offer up whatever comes to mind first. And usually what comes first is either defensive, over-explained, or revealing in ways you didn't intend. But silence? Silence is a complete sentence. It's a power move disguised as nothing at all. Next time someone asks you something challenging, try this. Look at them thoughtfully. Let 3 full seconds pass. Let them feel the weight of their question hanging in the air. Then, and only then, respond with precision. Watch what happens. Watch how the quality of the interaction shifts. Your response, when it finally comes, carries 10 times the weight it would have carried if you'd rushed to fill the void. Jung talked about the importance of holding the tension of opposites, the ability to sit with discomfort without immediately resolving it. This is exactly what strategic silence does. It creates a tension that most people can't tolerate, so they start talking. They start revealing. They start making concessions you never asked for. But here's where this lesson becomes truly ruthless. Your absence can be more influential than your presence. When you're the person who doesn't always show up, doesn't always respond immediately, doesn't always make yourself available, you become scarce. And scarcity, as any economist will tell you, creates value. This isn't about playing games or being intentionally difficult. It's about understanding that your attention, your presence, your psychic energy, these are valuable resources, and valuable resources should be invested strategically, not distributed freely to anyone who happens to ask. The most powerful people I've studied have mastered this completely. They're not always available. They don't respond to every email within minutes. They don't feel obligated to fill every silence or attend every meeting. And paradoxically, this makes people want their attention more. Because here's what nobody tells you. People value what they have to work for. When you make yourself too available, too eager to please, too quick to respond, you're not being kind. You're training people to devalue your time. Lesson 5. Every person you meet is walking around with an invisible map of their inner world. Their fears, desires, needs, and wounds. All of it creates a psychological topology that determines how they'll respond to everything you say and do. Machiavelli wrote, "Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see and few can feel. Everyone sees what you appear to be, few really know what you are." This is the foundation of what Jung called active imagination, the ability to perceive not just what people show you, but what they're unconsciously revealing. Most people listen to respond. They're so busy preparing their next point that they completely miss the psychological goldmine being offered to them in every conversation. But the dangerously smart, they listen to map. They're creating real-time psychological profiles of everyone they encounter. Here's how this works. When someone tells you about their job, they're not just giving you information. They're revealing their identity structure, their self-worth equation, their attachment style, their shadow material. Your job isn't to hear the surface content. It's to decode the underlying psychological architecture. For example, someone says, "I'm overwhelmed at work. There's too much to do and not enough time." Most people hear a complaint about workload. But if you're mapping their psychology, you might hear several possible deeper truths. They might be saying, "I need to feel valuable and being busy proves my worth." Or, "I can't set boundaries and I'm angry about it." Or, "I'm afraid if I'm not indispensable, they'll realize they don't need me." When you reflect back not just their words, but their emotional truth, something magical happens. They feel seen. And being seen, truly seen, creates an almost immediate bond of trust. But here's where this becomes ruthless. Once you understand someone's psychological map, you can navigate their terrain with precision. You can present your ideas in language that resonates with their core needs. You can anticipate their objections before they voice them. You can position yourself as the person who understands them when everyone else just hears words. This isn't manipulation and this is crucial, you use this understanding to serve their genuine interests. The ethical application of psychological cartography is to help people get what they actually need, even when they can't articulate it themselves. Every person is asking 3 invisible questions in every interaction. Do you see me? Do you understand me? Do you value me? When your psychological mirroring answers yes to all 3, you've created what Jung called psychic rapport, a resonance that transcends ordinary conversation. Lesson 6. Here's something that will disturb your comfortable certainty. The real world doesn't operate in black and white, and the people who insist it does. They're either naive or lying. Machiavelli's most controversial insight was this: since it is difficult to join them together, it is safer to be feared than loved when one of the two must be lacking. History crucified him for this observation, called him evil, made his name synonymous with manipulation. But what if he was simply describing reality without the comforting illusions most people need to sleep at night? Jung understood this deeply. He wrote about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge. And one of the biggest shadows in modern consciousness is this: sometimes doing the right thing in the short term creates terrible outcomes in the long term. Sometimes being nice enables destructive behavior. Sometimes protecting people requires making decisions that aren't pretty. This is what I call operational ethics, making pragmatic decisions that serve the greater good, even when those decisions can't be reduced to simple moral formulas. Imagine you're leading a team. One member is consistently undermining group cohesion, spreading toxicity, sabotaging projects. The nice thing is to give them more chances, more understanding, more patience. But what about the other team members suffering? What about the mission being compromised? Someone operating with moral complexity understands. Protecting the many sometimes requires difficult action regarding the one. This isn't cruelty. This is pragmatic compassion. Or consider, someone asks your honest opinion about a relationship you can see is destroying them. The kind thing might be to be supportive and avoid judgment. But what if real kindness requires telling them a difficult truth they're not ready to hear? This is the territory Machiavelli mapped, the space between comfortable morality and effective action, the zone where outcomes matter more than appearances, where being loved matters less than being effective. But, and hear me clearly on this, moral complexity is not moral relativism. You still need clear ethical boundaries. Lines you will not cross, values you will not compromise. The difference is that within those boundaries, you give yourself permission to be strategically flexible rather than rigidly dogmatic. How long will you continue believing that moral clarity is always possible? How long will you sacrifice effective action on the altar of appearing good to people who aren't paying attention anyway? Lesson 7. In a world where everyone broadcasts every thought, feeling, and breakfast choice, the person who cultivates mystery becomes magnetic. Not because mystery itself is powerful, but because selective disclosure signals something deeper: self-possession. Machiavelli wrote, "Men are so simple of mind and dominated by their immediate needs that a deceitful person will always find plenty ready to be deceived." But the psychological insight beneath this cynicism is profound. People fill information gaps with projection, and projection, as Jung taught us, reveals the projector far more than the projected. When you practice controlled disclosure, you're not hiding. You're creating space for others to reveal themselves. Think about it. The person who tells you everything about themselves in the first conversation, they're giving you all the data while learning nothing about you. They've surrendered strategic advantage before the game even begins. But the person who shares selectively, strategically, gradually, they're observing your responses, noting your reactions, mapping your psychological landscape while maintaining their own privacy. This isn't about being secretive. It's about understanding that information, once shared, can never be unshared. Every disclosure is a permanent transfer of power. Every revelation is a door opened that cannot be closed. Your psychic energy, your libido in Jungian terms, is finite. Every complete explanation, every detailed justification, every exhaustive defense drains that energy. And into whose reservoir does it flow? The person demanding the explanation. Here's the ruthless truth. People who demand complete transparency from you are often the same people who keep their own cards closest to their chest. They've just convinced you that your openness is virtue, while their privacy is strategy. The most powerful people I've studied master this completely. They reveal just enough to build genuine connection, but never so much that they lose strategic advantage. They understand timing, that the same piece of information can build trust when shared at the right moment and create suspicion when shared too early. Practice this. When someone asks a question, pause and ask yourself, what is the minimum I can share to honor this interaction while protecting my strategic position? Not minimum because you're hiding something shameful, but minimum because your psychic energy and personal narrative are valuable. Lesson 8. Here's what separates people who talk about change from people who create it. One group is obsessed with being right, the other is obsessed with being effective. Machiavelli observed, "The promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present." History called this cynical, but what if it's just accurate? What if clinging to past commitments when circumstances have changed is not integrity, but rigidity? Most people approach life like they're collecting merit badges. I worked so hard. I was so honest. I had good intentions. And they genuinely believe these things should guarantee results. But the universe doesn't grade on effort. Reality only cares about outcomes. Jung wrote about the difference between the ego, what we think we are, and the self, what we actually are. People with ego attachment need to be right, need to look good, need their efforts validated. People who have integrated their self, they just want results. This is outcome obsession at its most ruthless, being willing to abandon any strategy, any method, any approach that isn't producing the outcomes you want. Not being attached to your plan, not being invested in your process, only being committed to your results. Think about arguments. Most people argue to win, to prove they're right, to defend their position. But outcome-obsessed people ask a different question. What do I actually want from this interaction? Maybe they want behavior change. Maybe they want information. Maybe they want to preserve the relationship while addressing an issue. Once they're clear on the outcome, they choose their method accordingly. And sometimes, often, that means letting the other person win the argument while you win the actual objective. This applies everywhere. In business, focusing on revenue-generating activities rather than impressive-looking busy work. In relationships, prioritizing connection over being right. In personal growth, measuring progress by actual change rather than effort expended or knowledge consumed. Here's where this becomes truly dangerous. Outcome obsession reveals how much of your life is performance, how much energy you waste looking productive instead of being productive, how many hours you spend appearing smart instead of getting effective. The ruthless lesson? Most of what you do doesn't matter. There's a vital 20% of activities producing 80% of your results. Outcome obsession means identifying that 20% and becoming strategically lazy about everything else. But here's the ethical boundary. Your outcomes should include maintaining your integrity, treating people well, and contributing positively. When these values are built into your definition of success, outcome obsession becomes a force for good rather than sociopathic ambition. You've just been exposed to 8 lessons that history tried to bury because they're too powerful for the masses. But here's what nobody tells you about Machiavelli. He wasn't teaching evil. He was teaching visibility. He was making the unconscious machinery of power conscious. And consciousness, as Jung knew, is the only path to freedom. These lessons aren't about becoming ruthless. They're about becoming free from the psychological patterns that make you controllable. Free from the emotional reactivity that gives others power over your inner state. Free from the unconscious behaviors that keep you trapped in someone else's game. Today, we learned from Niccolò Machiavelli that strategic intelligence isn't cruelty, it's clarity. And from Carl Jung that making the unconscious conscious transforms fate into choice. Pick one lesson, just one. Practice it for the next 7 days. Notice how people respond differently. Notice how you feel different. Notice how situations that used to control you suddenly become navigable. But remember, with this knowledge comes responsibility. Use these insights to protect yourself, not harm others. Use them to create better outcomes for everyone, not just yourself. The world needs more strategically intelligent people who use their power ethically. If this sparked something in you, hit that like button and share this wisdom with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to join our community where we explore ideas that transform how we see ourselves and the world. Drop a comment. Which lesson hit you hardest? Which one will you practice first? Until we meet again, carry these insights forward. Let Machiavelli's wisdom remind us, understanding power doesn't corrupt us. It liberates us to use our power consciously, strategically, and ethically. Wishing you moments of clarity and courage until our next exploration. Together, may you find our talks not only educational, but also inspirational and hopefully, ultimately, transformational. See you next time.